Hello and welcome to the Doofcast, a film and TV podcast from Doof Media. My name is Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, he talks to all of us with his mind, not his voice. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Yeah, we've established this before. I'm speaking directly into your mind right now. It's an illusion that you're hearing me, you know?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind the people, because they forget sometimes, you know?
They do.
Us silly non-mutant humans forget things at times, and you need to remind us.
Yeah, my incredibly powerful intellect is just sometimes too much even for me. So
yeah, and yet you worship a missile. It's kind of weird.
Is that weird?
I mean, I think so.
Oh.
This week on the show, Deconstructing Apes continues with Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the 1970 follow-up to the surprising hit film that we talked about last week. We're moving on to the second film in our 10-film series, Matt. I'm pretty excited about this one, too.
I am as well.
And then I believe you have a virtual reality game you wanted to chat about briefly on the podcast. So we're gonna let you talk to us about VR. I actually can't wait to find out what it is about this thing that is so intriguing to you.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I think it'll be worth talking about for at least a little bit.
Sure. And then I wanted to finish up the podcast with my thing that you haven't experienced, which is the television show House of the Dragon, which concluded its second season last weekend. And I have thoughts. I have things to say. And not even specific to House of the Dragon. Of course, you haven't seen it, so I'm not going to spoil you on the show. But I think there's a problem with how we do TV these days, Matt. I think there's a big problem.
Well, I can't wait to hear about the problem.
All right, let's get into our main event of the evening. Let's talk all about Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Matt, what is this movie all about?
The sole survivor of an interplanetary rescue mission searches for the only survivor of the previous expedition. He discovers a planet ruled by apes and an underground city run by telepathic humans.
I'm sorry, what now?
Yep.
This movie was written by Paul Den and Mort Abrahams. It was directed by Ted Post. And if you're wondering why none of those names are familiar to anyone on the planet, well, there's a pretty good reason for that. Stars a man named James Franciscus and also Charlton Heston. Sort of? Kind of? He's there. He's definitely there.
He is. I mean, he's a prominent part of the movie eventually.
Eventually. All right, Matt. I gotta know. What did you think of Beneath the Planet of the Apes?
So this is one of those, like, I would never say this is a good movie, but I loved it so much. So, okay, here's the funny thing about my history with this movie is when you asked like what Planet of the Apes movies I'd seen when we were starting this project, I was like, I saw the first one, and then I'm pretty sure I saw one of the later ones, and I had this smattering of hallucinatory images and, you know, really like nightmare concepts scattered throughout my brain, and certain specific scenes where I was like, that's got to just be because I saw it when I was a kid and it's become distorted over time. Turns out I had just seen this movie and I was remembering it quite accurately. And I just couldn't believe that was what the movie was. You know me, Scott. I love movies that go big. I love movies that are really reaching for something, even if they don't necessarily reach it successfully. And that is what this movie does. So I had a lot of fun with this movie. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's so great. I love every little bit of that. I think this is one of those rare and this is kind of the reason why we're doing this whole series, right? Is that you have this movie, Planet of the Apes, comes out in 1968, makes $32 million, $32.5 million. I think cost maybe $5, and that might even be too much. So it turns a pretty good profit for 20th Century Fox. And they kind of rush out a sequel. The sequel to this film comes out in 1970. And that's kind of the story of this entire series, at least these first 5, by the way. Like, we get 5 movies from 1968 until 1974, which is pretty fast turnaround. So they rush this sequel, and like everything you hear about like the making of this movie and like the reasoning behind it and all these things kind of makes you expect that you're going to have just like this hastily produced retread of everything the last movie did. Like, this is just going to be a movie that, like, okay, we got to go back and we're going to do this again, and it's all going to be the same. And what I love about this movie is that is 100% true for like the first 45 minutes. That it really does seem like a movie that is just doing all the things again. We got a human crash landing on the planet. They're captured by the apes. They run into Nova, this beautiful woman that can't talk. They have to escape. They run into the same two chimpanzees that they saw in the last one, and it's like, oh, we're doing everything the same. And then very quickly it stops being that and becomes something entirely different, and in the best possible
Uh-huh.
way. And yeah, I agree with you in that, like, I think it would be unfair as a critic to call this a good movie. But damn, do I love it, and I respect the hell out of them for just like going for it. And I don't know if this is true, but the headcanon I have for this film, Matt, is that every time the studio asked for the dailies of the movie, they sent the first half to them. They just
Hmm.
sent images of the first half, and they're like, "Yes, good, good. Apes, humans, yes, in prison." Um, and then they just hid everything that was the second half of the movie and never showed them. Um, what a remarkable accomplishment this is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the first movie, we talked about it a bit, how it feels like an episode of Star Trek
Hmm.
more than sort of typical adventure sci-fi. It's more cerebral sci-fi. This is kind of even more so like a weird episode of Star Trek, like one of the
Yeah.
less popular episodes of Star Trek, where they're going for some really heady philosophical notion, and by the end of it, you're kind of impacted by it, but you're also kind of not sure if you can articulate what they were trying to say exactly.
Yeah. I think it is interesting that in a film where a group of mutant human beings worship an atomic missile, I'm less clear about what the metaphor and the themes of the film are. Isn't is that weird?
Uh-huh.
Isn't that a little
Yeah.
weird?
That's hilarious, because you're totally right. It's like we already did this exact thing, except like the metaphor was like we saw the exploded Statue of Liberty, and that was like, okay, yeah, we blew ourselves up. Now we're making it like almost too literal, and so you're like, okay, I get it. Humans bad. I get it.
Yeah.
I think the interesting, okay, so here's where the movie genuinely becomes muddy for me, and I just think this is kind of a flaw, unless you can help me figure it out. Is it's like, okay, yeah, humans self-destructive. The previous movie introduced some kind of idea that, like, well, maybe the apes can be the successors of the humans, and while they have their flaws, they will be there's a chance to start over.
Mhm.
We'll say that much. We're not going to say the apes are better than the humans, but we'll say there's a chance to start over. And then in this movie, they introduce like a couple of things that really muddy things. One of them is, well, the gorillas. Oh man, the gorillas are just awful. Which is a weird thing to introduce in a story that's kind of about racism.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, definitely.
And then also just like the idea that uh, uh, the human the evolved humans, which, are we going to even call them humans anymore now that they've like evolved and mutated?
No,
Um,
they're just mutants, I think is
they're
fair.
just
Yeah.
they're just mutants. Yeah, it's like, what is that? What is that? Does that say anything about humanity anymore? I think that maybe I'm unusual for having this objection, but I was like, these people aren't even really human anymore. So this isn't even humans bad anymore. This is just like, here we have yet another group of people who are sort of stuck in this self-destructive cycle, along
Yeah.
with the humans, along with the gorillas. And I guess, okay, so I guess to round this out, like the final moment of the film where Charlton Heston destroys the earth, um, ends up just being a statement about how all sentient life is awful.
Basically, yeah.
And, and I didn't feel like that was the vibe of the first movie, but that does seem to be the vibe of this movie.
I mean, what I will say is it is a perfect kind of continuation of the Taylor character we met in the first movie.
Yeah.
That, this guy, this pessimistic hater of humanity, um, is traveling the stars searching for life out there that is better than us, ends up back home, sees apes, and maybe even potentially what you're saying, sees apes as this possible way of being better than us, and by the end of the movie has just realized that no, nobody's better than anyone, we're all the same, we're destructive, violent creatures, all of us, and just decides that we should all die. That's a perfect like wrap up of his particular arc. But I agree with you that the confusing part, obviously, like the worship of a atomic bomb is pretty transparently obvious, right? Is a reflection on our obsession with these weapons and with destruction and the idea of the stuff as a deterrent, but also just a tool to rule the world. But yeah, I mean, making them mutants that talk telepathically is a fun Star Trek idea, but I ultimately like I'm not sure what we can say about that specifically. I mean, one thing I did catch on to is we haven't talked about Brent very much. We're going to have to talk about our main character of this film, Brent, who is as boring as his name sounds. But
Mhm.
um, apologies to all the Brents out
Yes. Sorry, Brent.
there. He does say something when he's sitting down in the abandoned subway. I think he's talking to Nova and frustrated that she can't talk. And then I think he says like he's ruminating on humanity and says like did we ever gain anything from all that talking anyway, just that sitting in rooms and talking. And I do think it's interesting that the base level humans in this world cannot speak, and then the quote unquote advanced mutated humans don't speak either, they communicate telepathically. And I wonder if that's supposed to be like the movie's rumination on the idea that, oh no, like speech and communication is not a thing that either defines our terribleness or subverts it. It's just
Mhm.
it's like it's nothing, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know, like it's confusing.
Yeah, it could just be the idea that maybe like I feel like what I end up doing is I just start projecting things like
Sure.
when we have this sort of conversation, because I'm just like, well, maybe they're saying that once a creature becomes too intelligent, it is intrinsically self-destructive. It intrinsically trends towards self-destructiveness because it builds greater and greater weapons and is, finds ways of conniving against its brother, and eventually it all culminates in the same end, which is destruction of the society, and on a long enough timeline, that's the destruction of the whole world because you just build bigger and bigger bombs. And
Yeah.
like that's like so cynical, but I mean, it's I don't know. I've certainly read sci-fi that was at least that cynical before, so maybe they are saying that. It just it yeah, right. The first movie had a very clear message, right? And this movie, I think, loses that a bit, while funnily enough, like retreading a lot of the same, moments, like you pointed out.
Yeah.
Like yeah, I don't know. I know I'm hopping around, but like the first 45 minutes, I actually just found quite tedious and was not really into, and was like, so this is just a remake. We just remade the movie a year later with a different character.
Yeah.
Uh, and then you're right, it totally becomes a different movie, and it becomes way more fun in the last half.
Not only remade the movie with a different character, but an infinitely less interesting character, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that everything we said that was interesting and surprising about Planet of the Apes and how it decided to make Charlton Heston's Taylor character, like how it characterized him, how he interacted with his uh, the other uh, astronauts, and how he kind of discovered this world and his reaction to things. None of that is present in Brent. In fact, I can't actually tell you like what is Brent's character trait. Like
Hmm.
what does he care about? Like we don't spend time doing any of that, right? Like
Hmm.
the most we do is he is crash landed with his skipper, and his skipper is like reeling at the fact that it's been as many years as it's been, and his wife and his kids are dead, and none of that is reflected on Brent. Like his reaction to that is just like silence, pondering. And
Yeah.
so, like, did he have a wife? Did he have kids? Like, what is his reaction to it being 1,000, 2,000 years later? What does he want? Why is he here? Like, they don't spend time doing any of that, and he ends up just being this shell of a character who doesn't matter, who is very clearly just Charlton Heston insert because we needed a main character for this, and Heston said he didn't want to be in this movie enough to be the main character.
Yeah, that I totally agree with all that. I mean, they even picked like a younger, more handsome, more muscular man just because it's
Yeah,
like we don't really care that he's a character. He just needs to be pleasant to watch. He's gonna have his shirt off. It's fine.
yeah.
Um,
He's like the actress who played Nova, except he can speak. But it's like basically the same level of how much we care
uh,
about them as humans and characters. Yeah,
yeah. Speaking of which, the one scene in the movie that I think is just like actually a bad scene is when he first meets Nova and he spends. I swear I didn't look at the clock, but I swear it was like over 5 minutes of him talking at her, like
yeah,
knowing that she couldn't understand, but continuing to do it anyway
yeah.
and being like, Taylor, have you seen Taylor?
And then
Taylor,
then we have to
Taylor.
do flashbacks to the first movie, which I don't even know if this is a flashback. I think it's just a new scene. It's just her remembering things that were in a new scene of him saying his name is Taylor and giving her the dog tags. I don't think that was in the first movie. I don't
No,
remember, but
no.
I know there was a scene where he said he was Taylor and she was Nova. I remember that happening, but I don't think we saw the dog tag
I,
exchange
I'm,
sequence.
I'm 9,000,000% sure he didn't have his dog tags in the first movie. This is a thing they made up later. Fine. I don't care.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I agree with you. The pacing of this movie is kind of weird and off. But the thing that I remembered so much about the first movie is that it is also very deliberately paced. Like we called this is a very 60s/70s paced film in which they're very deliberate things like the journeying through the forbidden zone portions of the film are like very slow and deliberate. And it's it's not that this movie is like slower paced. I think actually what I came to the conclusion of here is that the directing is just not as good. And so when you have these moments of characters traversing this stuff and the composition of the shot is just inherently less interesting to the point where it gets tedious and boring.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I mean, I like there's nothing differently paced about the first 45 minutes of this movie. It's definitely aping the last movie in just about every way, but is so much less interesting.
Mhm.
Like even like a perfect encapsulation of the differences is the iconic moment where Charlton Heston sees the Statue of Liberty and realizes this is Earth. To how does this movie does it? He's in a subway and he like looks at a subway sign and he almost has the exact same reaction. Like it's actually absurd that he says near the same thing, right? He's just like, "Did we finally do it?" Like I just don't think
Yeah.
I think that fits Charlton Heston's character perfectly. That his reaction to seeing the Statue of Liberty and realizing this is Earth is just, oh, we must have killed ourselves, because that fits with his belief of humanity. It fits his pessimism about who we are as a people. But Brent doesn't have that, or at least
Mhm.
we're not shown it. And so his reaction being the same doesn't make any sense. And it's
Yeah.
also shot much less interesting.
Yeah.
The movie's really cheaper too. Like this movie cost $2.5 million to make. It's a much cheaper film, and it looks it in every way. The director Ted Post is a TV director, so I think in your this is an episode of Star Trek opinion, like even closer, because this guy doesn't
Mhm.
direct films, he directs TV. It's just a worse looking film in every aspect.
Yeah, the subterranean sets, like I kind of had this feeling that if I punched the wall, my hand would go through.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a moment where Taylor and Brent are fighting in the prison where Brent gets thrown into a wall and like the plaster of the wall breaks off and
uh
falls down, and I thought that was an oops and not like an intended design of the set, which it ends up actually being. But I thought that was like, oh, he just threw him too hard into the wall and it broke the
yeah,
set. That's not what it was, but
that's funny.
it felt like it because of how cheap everything looks. Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you said about Brent. If I were to suggest, some script notes to this movie, it would be lean into Brent being a Boy Scout, you know, like
Yeah. Mhm.
make him
The anti-Taylor, right?
yeah, actually make him the anti-Taylor instead of just leaving him a cipher. Like you can almost see it, right? Like his reaction when his shipmate is dying, as he's being very like, you know, heroic and kind and taking care of the man.
Yeah.
And like I can imagine, you know, he sees all this evidence that he's clearly in the New York City subway, and he just doesn't get it because he just can't get it through his head that this horrible thing has happened, and Taylor
Yeah.
has to like explain it to him. Like that would be a much more dramatic, or could have been a much more dramatic moment. Um, and also then you can kind of do something with that. Like, what does it mean to put Mr. Cynicism, Mr. Humanity Sucks against Mr. Optimism,
Yeah.
who like can't accept that this has happened? Like then you can actually have, you know, an argument between the characters, and
Yeah.
um,
Maybe
yeah,
the fight that happens between them at the end is not just mutants are controlling the two characters and making them fight each other. Maybe it's actually a difference of opinion that leads to a physical conflict between the two characters, right?
yeah,
Like that would be an infinitely more interesting than just the this huge fight, which by the way, that fight goes on for so long. The two
uh-huh,
of them fight for so long. And it's
yeah,
like there's no drama here because neither of them are in control of their actions. Like it just there's nothing. And I
yeah.
just like, let's hurry it up. I know they're not gonna kill each other. Come on.
Yeah, you're not even sure who you want to see die. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, you could have. I don't know. I'm. This is only just now occurring to me, but they could have made it be like one of them wants to detonate the bomb, one of them is trying to stop the other. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, that's honestly like it had been a long time since I seen this movie. So that's honestly where I thought we were going at the end. Like the thing I remembered was that Heston decides to like activate the bomb. Like I
mhm,
remembered that as the final moment because it's such a
yeah,
it's such a powerful moment to end your film on. And
yeah,
I thought that's where we were going, is that Brent was going to kind of try to stand in the way and try to prevent him from doing that. But no, he just gets shot brutally.
yeah. So yeah. First of all, I did remember that ending, and I remembered the voiceover, but my mind dismissed that as impossible because there's no way you would end a movie that way. Um,
Well,
and,
especially with the knowledge that there's 3 films after this one, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of the reason is I was like, that must have been a later movie if that ever happened. But no, that was the second movie. Yeah, and then the point of Brent getting just unceremoniously mowed down. It's got to be. I mean, it's actually interesting. Like
Yeah.
it like
Yeah.
goes out the other side of being camp into like, whoa. So like that was the protagonist, and he was fighting to save the world, and then the apes just blow him away and he's dead,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh shit. Like
Yeah.
I felt something there, like that never happens in movies, you know.
Especially this world we live in now where just like franchises go on and on and on and can never end, and
Mhm,
there can never be real death or change because we always want the ability, like even if in 2024 this is not a movie that is destined to have a sequel, like you want to leave the potential there. So we can't kill anyone, we can't do anything drastic like end the fucking world because want to we might want to have more, we might want to do more of this, and we need to play it safe. And yeah, this movie does not play it safe ever. like once they head underground, the titular beneath, we've abandoned playing it safe.
mhm,
um I guess like at the same time, as much as I love it for doing that, I think the big problem for me, and talking, kind of circling back around to our problems with a confusion around the theming, the apes part of this Planet of the Apes film, I still don't think I understand what's actually happening here. I think
mhm,
this is handled really weird. Um, so
mhm,
basically, what we're told here, what when Brent gets to the ape city, the first thing that he sees is the council is meeting, and this new gorilla that we haven't seen before, named Ursus, is talking to the council about basically what he wants to do is take an army of apes and go into the Forbidden Zone to fight a war. And you're immediately like, wait a minute, a war against what?
mhm.
Like what? we don't know at this point that there's a whole human civilization of mutants there, right? He's just like the struggle I have with this is that we do this very intentional scene where we see chimpanzees with signs picketing and trying to tell them, this is again trying to reflect the 60s and the anti-war movements and things like that, trying to say war is bad, we need peace, we need freedom, these kind of things. But like there's no specificity to it because they have no enemy yet. Like they don't know who their enemy is. Like I really thought that this we were protesting a war with just humanity, and
Mhm.
like that didn't make any sense because the humans are animals in this movie. Like that's not a war. That's just essentially a genocide. You're just going to
Mhm.
round up and kill all the humans. Like that's a different thing to protest than war. And I just
Mhm.
like I felt like they were reaching for something. They wanted this war, they wanted the gorillas to be representative of the war hockey nature of humanity, and they wanted to show dissent and disagreement amongst the ranks of the apes and do this very charged protest thing, but they didn't like spend any time building up like the why any of this is happening portion of this thing.
Mhm.
And it just left me feeling like confused, and like especially as compared to the first movie, because like there was a definite caste system in the first movie, right?
Yeah.
um but the chimpanzees were like the scientist intellectuals, the gorillas were definitely like the working class, like brutes, for lack of a better phrase, right? Like
Mhm.
they did, obviously did the soldiering, did the hunting, like they did all these things. And then the orangutans were clearly like the leadership caste, right? They were the ones in charge of the government. They were the judges on the council, like that. This is what they did. And like there's not a clear explanation here in this film, like why suddenly this gorilla has all this power.
Mhm.
Like why is this happening, how is this happening, like, and I don't need a lot of work towards that, but just like a little bit.
Yeah.
And it left me feeling more confused than invested.
Yeah, I think there's just too many things going on, and none
Yeah.
of it is clear. It's interesting, as you were going through that, I was picking some things out where I'm like, once again, I feel like I can project something interesting onto it that maybe wasn't even there. But, for example, consistently between both movies, we have the idea of, the lawgiver,
Yeah.
um, who I forget is so maybe this is a spoiler, but like, is that Caesar? Is that like is that the is this meant to be the character from the new series? Is that who that is? Or,
um yeah,
or
that's a spoiler. I like
it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. I'm just really the question in my mind is like no, never mind. It doesn't matter for this point. It's just they have a religious figure, a sort of Christ-like figure who has certain restrictions. Don't go into the forbidden zone, and humans are garbage. But
mhm,
other than that, apes are to be nonviolent, and ultimately it's a very pacifist, nonviolent philosophy with a lot of like warnings about the dangers of violence, and seems to have sort of buried within the dogma of it like this just true story of
yeah.
hey, humanity got powerful enough to destroy themselves, and of course the reason they did that is that they were so violent. So we're going to restart civilization, and we're going to do it in a way that's nonviolent, and we're not going to give humans a second chance because they they messed up.
Mhm.
And then in this movie, it seems like the sort of dogma has been twisted, and it's been you kind of see it in that first scene with the gorilla, with Ursus giving his speech, where he's like, obviously obviously humans, they're just you know they're just an animal, and the lawgiver said that they don't even have free will or something, but the only good human is a dead human, and everybody cheers. And it's basically this like perversion of the dogma where it goes from just like leave the humans alone, stay away from the humans, they're dangerous, to we got to wipe out the humans, and it becomes this violent militaristic ideology
Yeah.
to the point where then they sort of break, I think, well, I'm not sure if it's a religious stricture or just a taboo, but they break the taboo of going into the Forbidden Zone. And I don't know if this is meant to be implicit or not, but like after watching this movie, you're like, okay, so it's not just the Forbidden Zone because it's radioactive, it's the Forbidden Zone because it's got these freakazoid humans in it and they're
Yeah.
dangerous. And so, by okay, by violating the religious pacifist rule, they have brought upon themselves destruction is where
Yeah.
I was going with this.
Yeah, I like all that, and I think that's definitely there. I just think it's kind of muddled.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the character of Dr. Zaius, a character that I found so interesting in the first film, of this guy who's the minister of science. Like, he's not a chimpanzee, but he is definitely someone that, you know, I guess handles and administers the way in which we learn and study. Um, I don't understand his character in this movie at all. I
Yeah.
don't understand what's motivating him. So, he hears this speech by Ursus, this violent war ideology, and goes with him into the Forbidden Zone. Why?
Hmm.
Like, he says, like, there's a moment when he and Cornelius are having and Zero are having a conversation about the truth, right? And I think she says something about, like, the truth is important, and he says, like, there's a time for the truth, indicating that, like, now is not that time. And her response is like, and that time is always right now. And I was like, that's a fun, interesting conversation, but I don't understand what you're specifically arguing about there. Actually, what does Dr. Zaius going into the Forbidden Zone have to do with trying to hide the truth? Or like, that seems to be, we want to discover the truth. Actually, wasn't it Zaius specifically who was like, no, we should not go into the Forbidden Zone, we should
Yeah.
not discover the truth of where we came from, and if there are smart humans around here and all these things. It seems like he should be violently against that idea,
Yeah.
and is for some reason not.
Yeah. I mean, there's an interpretation of both of these movies taken together where Zaius had some privileged knowledge, from the secret scrolls that say there are intelligent humans out there. You should be afraid of humans because they are intelligent and they were the ones who destroyed the earth, and they created the Forbidden Zone.
Mm-hmm.
And because he doesn't seem surprised to find evidence of ancient human civilization, like he
Yeah.
doesn't seem surprised at all. It seems like he already expected this, maybe even already knew this.
Yep.
In which, like, but if that's true, you're totally right. Like, he would be like, okay, gorillas, yeah, sure, go kill all the humans you find in the forests, but we're not going in the Forbidden Zone.
Yeah.
It doesn't really make sense. It feels like there are scenes missing.
Well, and then when they get to the underground city, like, he's the one leading the charge at, like, violently destroying all the statues of the
Mhm.
the leaders of the mutants. And I was like, he's like, this is an abomination, and I'm like, why? Like, what? Huh?
Yeah.
I don't understand, man. I don't get it. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, I guess just the idea, like, yeah, he just becomes stupider in this movie,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
because he seems to go from. Uh, it's unclear what actions that he takes are his actual beliefs versus him propping up the ape religion dogma that where he thinks it's like it's important that everyone believe this, even though he doesn't necessarily believe it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing he's most violently resistant to is when the mutants show the image of the bleeding lawgiver, right?
Mhm.
And this, like, he sees this as a bastardization and a heresy against his religion, and he reacts to it. That's like the one moment of action he has in the movie is riding into the fire, and realizing it's all an illusion. And that makes sense. It makes sense that, like, if we have the war tribe that is the gorillas, and we have the science tribe that is the chimpanzees, then in this leadership role, the orangutans and Zaius specifically represent, like, religious dogma and theocracy, basically. That makes sense. but I still don't understand how his actions align with that. Like, there's this really interesting part where um Cornelius has lied and said that the reason why there's a bloody cloth in their house that they were using to dress Brent's wound is because he hit Zira on
Hmm.
the face because she spoke out in the council meeting, and he
Hmm.
was punishing her for doing this. And like, he says something to the effect of is like, and if she says something again, I'll hit her again. And Zaius's response is like, now, don't resort to violence.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
You're leading the expedition for war. What do you mean don't commit the like? I'm
Right.
so confused as to what his character's role in this whole thing is.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I feel like we've got the end of the loose thread that connects to something meaningful here.
Hmm.
Because I mean, everything you're saying, it's like that is the conflict of his character, I guess, but it's unclear.
Sure.
It's like, okay, but what do you mean, Matt? It's like, well, like the last thing that happens in the movie is Taylor asks him for help, and Zaius says, "You ask me to help you? Man is evil, capable of nothing but destruction." And then Taylor, it sort of
Proves him right.
proves him right, but sort of like lives out a self-fulfilling prophecy where
Yeah.
it's like, well, if I'm evil, it's because you expect me to be evil,
Right.
and
Like,
it's this, we're all doomed to like reenact our mistakes that were, I don't know, man, but
yeah, his last line as he falls on the ignition button on the bomb is like, "God damn you!" Right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
he's yeah. Um,
something like that.
something like that. But yeah, I mean, I think the cool thing about this movie is that all this is there and is able to be discussed. Like again, what I want to say is I have some problems with this film overall, but like the fact that it's doing something this radically different and interesting is so cool to me. Like, I just
Hmm.
like, it is incredible to me that uh this movie got made like this because it's so out there. It's so
Yeah.
wild. Like I just utmost respect to Charlton Heston, who basically was like, "No, I don't do sequels. I'm not doing this movie." And they were like, "Come on, man, please, we really need you in this movie. You're key to this whole thing working. You were key to the first one." And his thing was like, "Fine, but I don't want to be in it that much. And I also, you have to kill me so I don't have to be in any of these after this." And that was his agreement. And he donated his salary to charity. He didn't make a buck off this movie, and he got his way. He was barely in the movie. He was missing from the entire first half basically, and he got to die at the end. And like, just imagine that happening today. You can't. You
Yeah.
can't.
Not, and especially not in a way where they kill him and they also kill the other guy who otherwise
Yeah.
would have been the like, well, at least this guy's going to carry our franchise.
Hmm. Yeah.
God, it's great. It's great. It's great. The one thing both of these movies have in common is they're creepy and unsettling.
Yeah.
There's, even setting aside the fact that special effects haven't aged perfectly, there is just something unnerving about, apes riding around on horses and chasing, naked humans and catching them in nets. And there was a lot of that in this movie where like the apes are like practicing killing the humans. There was a surprisingly long sequence where you've got basically the apes are practicing their human catching and killing skills, and
Yeah.
in many cases just like actually killing the humans as part of the practice.
Uh-huh.
And it's pretty intense, actually. Like,
It
it's
is.
there's a lot of um I don't know if I want to go so far as to say upsetting, because it kind of takes a lot to upset a person in this day and age, but they that's clearly what they were going for. There,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, there's a like they're really banging that militaristic drum, right? I think
Mhm.
they're trying to make like hit you with a lot of this imagery. The apes suddenly have cannons now. They
Mhm.
look like little dinky, funny little things, but
Yeah.
they're weapons of war. To where they just had kind of had like pistols and rifles before. Now they suddenly have cannons and machine guns. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like, there's moments in those sequences where like there's just random humans on horseback, like surrounded by apes, to where I don't know, like, you could interpret that as, "Oh, they just found a random human riding a horse," but you could also interpret that as they just put this human up on a horse and then dragged it off to practice, like, demounting a
Uh-huh.
person, and it's like, that's kinda fucked up, actually.
Yeah, that's kind of what it
Um,
looked like, actually.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, featuring at least one moment where the horse actually just falls backwards and sort of like rolls over a man.
yeah, like, the
Do you remember what I'm talking
I
about?
do. Is that person okay?
I had the same thought where I was like, "Ow, ooh, God, holy shit!"
Was the stunt meant to go that way?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know. Yeah, yeah. And then, like, okay, can we talk about the masks for a little bit here?
sure, sure.
They're bad. Like, I think they weren't great in the first movie, right? They were showing their age, but I think they were still pretty effective. I don't know what happened in this movie. I did read something. They had no money in this movie, so all the extras just had pullover masks. Like, they had this is a war movie, right? They have lots of these militaristic guerrillas like on the screen, dozens and dozens at a time. They were just wearing like rubber pullover masks, and you can tell every wide shot in this film. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my god,
The
those look
worst
super fake.
the worst part is I don't know, what is it? The speech at the beginning,
Hmm.
toward the beginning where you've got a whole bunch of the grills and a whole bunch of the chimpanzees. Every single chimpanzee mask looks awful, and then you've got, to emphasizing it, making it even worse, you've got Zira and Cornelius like in the corner with actually good masks, which
Yeah,
just draws the contrast to all the other ones where like their eyes don't even, you can't even see their eyes. Like you just
yeah,
see like a hole. it's it's very
yeah.
bad. Yeah, I agree.
Um, I do think like the makeup though is worse too. Like, maybe this is just a result of the budget. Maybe they didn't have the same makeup people that just couldn't do the effect as well. But you pointed out last week that like one of the first times you meet Zaius, you can see the human teeth inside the makeup teeth. I saw that at least half a dozen times in
Hmm.
this movie. Like, I felt like it was happening constantly, and that's the type of thing where I do wonder: was that makeup, or was that just like composition of scenes that
Hmm.
like the cinematographers and the director of the first film were smart enough to know these are the angles that will best hide that effect, and these are the angles that will accidentally expose that effect, and they just stayed away from those angles, whereas this movie just did not do that. I don't know, but it felt like that sometimes, because I was like, man, yeah, I can definitely see the mouth inside the mouth in this ape for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I noticed all that as well. I think just overall less attention to detail.
And a smallness and a cheapness
Yeah.
across the board. Like, the ape city, when we see it from a distance as the gorillas are kind of single file marching out of it, it looks tiny. Like, is supposed to be like the civilization of the world, right? Like, this
Hmm.
is representative of like all apedom, and it looks like it's like a couple buildings on a hill, and that's it. I mean, I guess you could maybe just pretend this is just one angle of a larger city, and we don't get to see it all, but we never get to see that.
Hmm.
It's just because everything feels so small and contained and cheap.
Yeah.
Um, it's not really working.
Like you said, it seems like it was shot for TV. The
Yep.
first one was like this grand artistic film. Actually, I'd say like half of why it's remembered well is it
Yep.
actually just looks good. Like it looks good to like beautiful. Like
Yep.
the parts when they're crossing the desert at the beginning of the movie, which is like a very slow, atmospheric part. It's well shot. It looks really cool. Whereas
Yeah.
this is it. I think even the way that it's shot is just closer in. Like it's shot close in that way that makes you feel like this would look good on a TV set,
Yeah.
and maybe it's not meant to be a film in a theater. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a shame, because I think those visuals are definitely part of what is so fun about these movies.
mhm.
So, um,
I guess we talked about the mutants a little bit, obviously, but like I guess there's a few interesting things. Just kind of keep, I don't know, things I thought were cool. Like the fact that they're total hypocrites in like
Yeah.
a different way, I guess, than the apes, where they're like the apes think of themselves as pacifists, but they exclude humans from that.
Yeah,
And
which that I mean, at least you can track the logic of that
yeah,
because they see these things as
uh,
subhuman animals, and so
right.
yeah.
And then the mutants, they have this thing where they're like, we're nonviolent, we would never hurt anyone, and then they're just constantly torturing everyone with their minds, but they've classified that to themselves as like, well, we're not doing it, you're doing it to
Yeah.
yourself,
It's
stop
the
hitting
old
yourself.
it's the old Batman Begins
Uh-huh.
loophole.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm just gonna make you kill each other and then I'm not yeah, it's stupid.
Yeah.
I also find it really interesting that they wear masks, right?
Hmm.
Like the I understand like in the dualistic reason it's so we can have a reveal where they take off the masks and see that they're not really human at all.
Hmm.
But like it's interesting from the perspective of them as well, right? Like this is a society that lives isolated from everything. No one has ever visited them. And if they have, it's been like the random ape scout that they've tortured and killed, right?
Hmm.
So why are they wearing these human masks all the time? And
Yeah.
I think that's like you could attempt to read something profound into that is that there's this people that are not human but are trying to act human and only reveal their true selves in key moments of their lives. I think that's interesting.
Hmm.
If probably not like necessarily intended by the film.
Yeah, that seems like one of those things where it was ultimately sort of plot convenience, but I do like the idea that maybe, they have these statues, these busts of their predecessors,
Hmm.
and they know that they don't look like that anymore, so they wear the mask so they'll look like that. And it's sort of a denial of the consequences of the violence and we get such a tiny tantalizing view of what their religion actually is,
Yeah.
but it is fun. Like there's a whole church session where they give these perverse prayers that are basically taken from Christian prayers, but
Yeah.
then it's like what was like the holy fallout. And I had it in front of me a second ago and then I clicked away from it, but it's like just elevating and praising the nuclear war that happened and the nuclear bomb and just having this weird nonsense pastiche of Christianity and that,
Yeah.
and like being in denial about the fact that they destroyed the world. It's almost, I almost like it more for not being totally spelled out, because it just gets your imagination going
For sure.
where you're like, what is this 2,000-year-old death cult that is the remnants of human civilization that has started worshiping the atomic bomb, like that. I think that's the thing about this movie is like the image of a bunch of subterranean people worshiping an atomic bomb is so compelling
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I almost don't want to know anything else.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Just that idea all by itself, just like this perfect, beautiful image of you opening the doors to St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City,
Hmm.
and up there on the altar, right in front of the organ, is a nuclear missile,
Hmm.
and that is the God that they are praying to. Is just mwah, is perfect. And yeah, I think the movie around it kind of fails to live up to that image ultimately, but like the fact that we're doing that is incredible.
Yeah. I,
And it's this kind of perfectly of its time type of thing, because I feel like if we tried to do something exactly like that today, one group or another would just lose their fucking minds
yeah.
about it.
Right. That's true. That's true. What one thing you probably noticed is there are also crosses, but they're all inverted crosses.
Yeah. Maybe that's how we kept the Christians happy by saying, no, 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 these are not like evolved Christians. These are just Satanists, and
Yeah.
that's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. That's probably it. You're right.
Oh man, I mean, like I love this film. Like every bad thing we said about it is I have a counterpoint of like why it's actually really really great. So,
Yeah.
did you have anything else you wanted to say about it? I feel like we're running quick here, but
It's I don't know that I do. I kind of hope this would be one of those movies where we could nail together some kind of coherent thesis, but I kind of suspected we wouldn't, because
yeah,
I do think it's a bit messy and unfocused in what it's trying to say. It's trying to say a lot of so what I like about it is it's trying to say a lot of things, and we kind of addressed that, right? Like we
Yeah.
talked about how they're trying to say some stuff with the Ape Society, they're trying to say something with Dr. Zaius and what's going on with him and with the gorillas and with the subterranean humans and the bomb religion and uh, uh probably yeah, but like it doesn't, it's too much and it doesn't come together and
Yeah.
it doesn't culminate in like a thesis statement other than like, and then they all destroy themselves because that's what happens when you're warlike.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, sure, I guess.
One thing I don't like is how little Zira and Cornelius had to do in this one. Like
Hmm.
they just kind of disappear from the film after we leave the Ape City. And especially knowing like where the series goes from here, which I do, like having them play a larger part in this movie in particular, I think would have been ultimately a good thing. But
Hmm.
it doesn't. I think also Roddy McDowall, who plays Cornelius in every single one of these movies, except for this one, maybe is part of the reason why they just kind of wrote those characters out,
Hmm.
because he wasn't available. He was off directing his own film, so they just recast the Cornelius character, and maybe that's why. I don't know.
That's funny. Okay, so you reminded me. I didn't realize they recast him first of all, but you reminded me. There's like one moment in the movie where Cornelius like walks from where he's standing by Zira over to answer the door,
Yes.
and it's a comical chimpanzee walk, and
Oh, I
it's
had I had this same. I noticed this exact same thing. I was like, "What is he doing?"
it's the only time in the whole movie that any ape character does anything like that.
He's just like he literally like puts his arms to his side and like
Uh-huh.
refuses to lift his arms at all to walk. It's the
Yeah.
weirdest thing
And
ever.
he's kind of hunched forward and gives that little
Yeah.
waddle, which is like the way a chimp waddles when it's
Yeah, but nobody else walks that way.
yeah,
They all just kind of walk like people.
right,
I
yeah,
mean, maybe slightly more hunched over, but just a little bit.
yeah,
I'm so glad you mentioned this because I literally noticed that exact same thing.
yeah. Like I think you saying he was recast. I'm like, yeah, because I don't think the other actor ever would have done that. So
I feel a little bit bad about. I feel like Nova got done dirty. Like we had good things to say about that actress in the first film, and I don't think she got anything to do in this film. Like I think the one of the big moments of the movie is when she cries out Taylor, right?
mhm.
Like this build up to these mute humans, and she's learned to talk. Which, by the way, I don't. Why are they mute? Why are humans like? I understand the idea of we've lost language, right? Like as a symbol of our regression as a species. But like we'd still probably grunt, right? They don't even do that. It's like their vocal cords just don't work anymore.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things we're not meant to take at like a science level, and we're just meant to be like
Okay, fine.
we've lost our spiritual essence of sentience. We because it's not just like I think the humans are actually just de-evolved. Like
Yes. Yeah.
they're dumber in the same way that the apes are smarter. It's not just language;
Yeah.
it's conceptual formation and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's interesting to bring her up because we get this little scene where it's like a flashback to Taylor talking to her, and obviously she doesn't understand what he's saying, but he's like, "Yeah, we'll go settle somewhere and we'll have a bunch of children, and the children will probably learn how to talk, and we can restart civilization." Um, and he seems somewhat optimistic about this. It's like
Yeah.
it's like within our understanding of Taylor as a character, and but also somewhat optimistic and hopeful for the future. And and then I think that scene was actually important because it makes you a lot sadder when Zira is not Zira, Nova is killed,
Yeah.
because you're just like, well, shit, like that was. I mean, it's not like he can't find another woman, but it's like I think for him that was it. Like that was him
Yeah.
losing hope in any kind of future for humanity.
Yeah. I agree.
Which,
And
yeah.
yeah, it's really unceremonious, like the way
Mhm.
she dies. Like it's just like they a very weirdly shot sequence in which we don't even see the gorilla that's walking up the stairs about to attack them until he's like way far up the stair. Like I don't know, the composition of that shot was just bad. But yeah, then like they have this wrestle fight with this gorilla and he like gets a shot off and it hits her and she's dead.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's That's the point of no return for Taylor. I think you're right.
Yeah, yeah. So crazy movie.
Did you know they originally wanted to have like a human ape hybrid baby in this movie, and then they decided that that might not pass the like that would be too. I don't know. The ratings would not like that for some reason.
I did not know that.
But then it's like, who would it be?
Right, and that seems like yet another one of those elements where they were just like throwing
Yeah.
concepts in there
Hmm.
to see like maybe this, and I don't know, like I don't like if that had been in the movie, what would that mean?
I don't know. I mean, the commingling of the species, like this. I mean, there is like this kind of unwritten concept that I think the later films, the sequels that we will talk about in the 2010s, kind of wanted to explore is like, can these two peoples live in harmony with each
Mhm,
other? Is that possible? And that would be a good exploration of that idea. But yeah, that's not really what these movies are ultimately about.
mhm,
Um, I,
right.
I I do like I do wonder, like, if that's what the kiss with Zira at the beginning at the end of the first movie was. I don't know.
We're just
Uh,
leading into that. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. I feel like that would have been that I don't know. I feel like in some sense that kind of undermines the thematic idea of like how will these two peoples learn to live together if it's like, well,
yeah.
if they can breed, they're only sort of two peoples, right? Like
Right. Right.
I actually like the science fiction concept of you've got humans, chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas, and they're distinctly different species, and like that's a that's a hard problem to figure out,
Hmm.
in terms of the sociology of it.
Yeah.
I mean, even I'm probably gonna find some way to bring this up every episode. Just the fact that the Earth used to look exactly like this, Scott. It used to look exactly like it's depicted in these movies, and by that
Uh-huh.
I mean there were multiple hominid species running around,
Yeah.
some of which were kind of like us, some of which were less so like us, and many of these species could interbreed and did so. We've got Neanderthal and Denisovan and probably all kinds of other things we haven't even named yet because we haven't found the species they came from.
Hmm.
And so like that was a world that did exist, and we killed them all. Again, I'm going to say that every episode. I'm going to work it in.
All right.
Talk-
It'll work. I think thinking ahead, I think you'll find ample opportunities to bring this up
Awesome.
constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess one of the last things I'll say is the author of the first book did write a sequel book. It was about the humans uprising and throwing taking power from the apes, and then the apes eventually regressing in a similar way to the humans did. I think like that's interesting to me because like that seems like the most logical thing to do next. Like if you think about, okay, we're going to make a sequel to Planet of the Apes, what's it going to be? And it's like, oh, it's going to be Taylor and realizing where he is, he and Nova going back and attempting to free the people that have been
Mhm.
enslaved, or just like trying to restart civilization of humanity, and coming into conflict with the apes, and that inevitable conflict and that fight. Like that is to me the logical next step in these films. And the fact that they looked at that and said, pass, we're going to do this, like, is part of what makes this series so unique and different and wonderful. Because I'm like, I think that would have probably been an okay movie. It would not have been this, and I don't know if there's 10 movies in this series if that's the way they go.
Mhm. That's a good point. Yeah.
All right, that is Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Next up, we have Escape from the Planet of the Apes. That movie comes out in 1971, a year later. They are really just on the grind with these things.
Good for them.
Do 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 doof.
All right, Matt. Let's get on to your topic. Talk to me about virtual reality. What is this thing you wanted to talk about?
So, um, my kids have every once in a while dipped their heads into the old Oculus Quest 2, and
Mm-hmm.
typically they'll play a little bit, kind of enjoy it a bit. It's not that they not that they don't enjoy it. They just bounce off pretty quick. generally for the same reasons I do, where it's like, the headset's kind of heavy. You kind of feel like you've explored the concept of whatever this game is, and then you move on. And VR just doesn't have a lot of stickiness to it in the way that computer games do for some reason, right? I don't know quite why, but it's not my job to know why. But this game is called I Am Cat.
Okay. And in it, are you cat?
You are cat. So I'm just gonna. Okay. So I'm creeping up to explaining what the game is to sort of contextualize. So this game has hooked my kids more than any other VR game, but by a huge margin. And not only are they playing it, but like they're consistently like laughing gleefully while playing it. So like I'll be sitting in the living room doing whatever or doing the dishes, and they're in the living room with the VR headset, and I'll like wiggling around, and suddenly they'll like give that peal of laughter as that a child makes when they've like done something mischievous or they're being chased perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just and they don't get tired of it. Like it's been like several days and they still are like laughing gleefully while playing it, right? So that in and of itself is unique, because normally a child gets bored of things. Everyone gets bored of things. Humans get bored of things. So I finally actually played it because I had just been letting them do it. And so what it is like you're a house cat and you locomote in a way that I've never actually seen in a game before, in a VR game, where you hold up your hands and you've got your two cute little cat paws, and you crawl around by doing the little cat crawling motion in the air, and that causes you to run along the ground. And so you can run faster by doing that faster. And then if you want to jump up onto that thing over there, then you just kind of like bat the ground with your hands and you'll kind of launch up toward it. And you can get really good at this such that you can like leap up to the edge of that, the top of the couch, and then pounce from the edge of the couch up to the top of the aquarium. And then you can use your paw to grab stuff with your claws. So you can grab the little fish food from the top of the aquarium and shake it into the fish tank. And then the fish come to eat the food. And then you reach in and grab a fish, and it's all kind of a cartoony aesthetic, but it's like the fun thing is like you're cat sized. So all the objects in the house are really big. Like they're like 3 times bigger than they would be, but
Mm-hmm.
like they're all the objects in a normal house. And you're running around, and there's like an elderly grandma, who is also a giant, obviously, and she's kind of going about her errands. And if you like break a vase or whatever, then she'll get really mad and like try to swat you, which I guess is like, you don't really take damage. It's not really that kind of game. But I think if you get swatted hard enough, then you kind of like reset, and like whatever you were doing gets kind of interrupted. Like, and it's interesting because there is gameplay, but the gameplay is just like go grab that item and put it in the fridge or something. Like there'll be little mischievous little errands that one imagines that a cat might get up to. But it's not like there's no story. There's no like you're trying to escape from the house or anything. Like it's all just little quests like this. And I find it to be such an incredibly delightful concept and execution, and just taking advantage of what you can do with the concept of VR. There's a joy that's difficult to explain when you put it on and you realize like, oh, I'm a tiny little cat in a big house, but I can run around really fast and I can jump up and I can climb on stuff in a way that is superhuman. No human
Mm-hmm.
can sort of jump the way. It makes you I don't know. Like I see why my kids love it so much is the truth. Actually, it's like, oh, this is what I used to want to pretend. This is like what my imagination games were like when I was a kid, and I loved cats and tigers and wanted to be a tiger. It's like, well, I'm doing it in VR.
Yeah.
And like that's cool, man. Like this is okay. I'm basically done, but like it was genuinely kind of a new and cool thing that VR did for me.
Yeah, so I pulled up a video on YouTube while you were talking about this, just so I could visualize the things you're talking about, and it
Mhm.
looks really neat. I mean, like, I don't know if this is like the killer app that sells VR to me, but like, I have been like continually like wanting to invest in virtual reality stuff and just not pulled the trigger on it. And it's like stuff like this. I'm like, oh, this is cool. And the idea that I think I think my kids are a little too young still, but like I could see my kid in a couple years absolutely loving this thing. Cause yeah, I'm watching um this cat just like grabbed a fork and is trying to stab the grandma
Uh-huh.
who is unconscious on the floor right now. I
Yeah,
don't know how that happened,
well,
but
yeah, you can pounce on the grandma, and I mean, I think my daughter honestly just likes terrorizing the grandma. Like I think that's most of the fun, and then the grandma will come after her and she'll run away.
uh-huh.
Um, but like that's the thing. It's sort of emergent gameplay where you can do whatever you want. Yeah, it's like I'm not even saying like, oh, this is the best game ever. Everybody has to play it. It's
No,
just like this
yeah.
was just a delightful experience, and one of the things that you don't you don't realize what VR can do until somebody does something like this, and then you're like, oh, that like that. It kind of opens up your mind to other possibilities as
Now,
well.
why does the cat have a watch on it?
That's literally just like the way you activate your menu.
Oh.
But I do
So
it is funny.
they needed to build something into the game to explain why you were activating a menu. That's very funny.
I think it is funny that the cat has a watch. Yeah, yeah.
No, this seems really cool. I mean, like I continue to want to see VR do well. I like the headsets need to get lighter and cheaper.
Hmm.
Like this has to happen, and it will happen eventually, right? Like I think when they first advertised the Apple thing, you and I got pretty excited, and we were like, should we buy one? Should we buy
Mm,
one of these?" And it really just turns out that that was not it yet.
yeah,
And
yeah,
maybe future iterations of it will be. These technologies are continue to get better, and it's pretty exciting that things like this. I mean, you can kind of imagine in 10 years what things like this might look like.
yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly. I mean, just take this concept of like, think of all the imagination games you did as a child where you were some kind of animal
Hmm.
as a starting point, and be like, well, that could just be a game.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's just, there's a lot of cool VR games actually. I mean, there's probably like five where I'm like, okay, that's really creative and cool. I'm not going to go into them here, obviously, but like this is just another one on that pile of like, okay, VR is a cool modality. It's actually meaningfully different from computer, because even the YouTube video that you're watching is not quite doing it justice. Because I watched some YouTube videos before I put it on, and the YouTube video doesn't really communicate the sense of being small
Sure.
that you get when you're like when you have the 3D glasses on and you're sort of perceiving the environment. You're perceiving yourself as being in an environment instead of just seeing an image.
Yeah. Yeah.
So um,
That is one of the flaws of VR inherently, that it's like you cannot really demonstrate the experience
yeah,
outside of having the thing on, right?
it often looks much worse when you're just
Yeah.
watching a YouTube video of it because it's all shaky, and it's like, okay,
Mhm.
I hate this, but it's like, well, when you're wearing it, it's the opposite of shaky. It's like you're there, right? So
Sure. Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So that's I am cat.
I am cat. Yep.
If you have a VR headset, maybe get in there and throw Granny around.
Yeah. Be a cat.
The video I picked says, "Now that I know how to launch Granny with a glitch, I'm going to see if I can get her upstairs near the secret room."
I love
Show your
people.
kids this video so they figure out how to launch Granny.
They probably know about it, to be honest. But yeah.
Doodle-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, doof.
All right, Matt. My topic for the evening is the HBO series House of the Dragon. You know this one, right?
I watched a few episodes of this one. I'm
This
aware of I'm aware of the Game of Thrones, so
Yeah, so the concept, for those of you that maybe have been living under a rock, of House of the Dragon is it is a prequel to Game of Thrones. It is about the Targaryen civil war that happens, I think, like 200 years before the events of, I don't know. It doesn't matter. A number of years before the events of a Game of Thrones. And Matt, we're two seasons are done now with this show about dragons fighting in the civil war, and you're not going to believe it,
uh-huh.
but the war hasn't started yet.
Well, this is about how the Civil War started. It'll probably end right when the Civil War starts.
I mean, it's literally like if you did a show that was called The American Civil War, and after 18 hours, Fort Sumter happened, and
Uh-huh.
you're just like, what the fuck are we doing? I mean,
Uh-huh.
so, and that, like, that in and of itself is not necessarily a problem if like the stated goal of the show is like, I want to show you how everything led to this moment, right? Like how did we get here? But like how we got here became very clear like very early in the show. Um there's these two women that were really good friends when they were kids, and they grew up and then had competing claims for the throne, and that deteriorated as the people around them are crazy. You know, the usual Game of Thrones mankind is awful stuff. And I just like I'm so confused because this is like the larger conversation I wanted to have with you. There's this thing we do in modern TV now where like we we take a story like I think about Lost a lot. You know this, just generally, I think
Hmm.
about Lost a lot, but I
Hmm.
also think about Lost as this really interesting examination of like how to and how to not tell an ongoing complete story in the serialized television format.
Hmm.
Because like I think when Lost was at its best, and I love it throughout, don't get me wrong, but I think when Lost was at its best was when nobody working on the show had any fucking clue how it was going to end, and they just had to set about writing episodes that were just like, okay, what's going to happen this week and how do we resolve that. And yeah, it has threads of ongoing things and things like that, but what we have in this show is a show that is based off a story that has a clear beginning and end, and perhaps it would have only taken 8 episodes to tell that story. But we want to spend a lot of money on it, and we want it to last for a long time. So we're going to turn this whole story into 4 seasons of television, into essentially 40 hours of entertainment. And like it's not just the stretching out, because Lost, I mean like there's a different feeling of stretching the content to fit the required number of episodes, because Lost stretched content. Lost didn't have answers to questions for episodes and seasons, right? But it was always doing something. And this just feels like sometimes I just don't know what we're doing. And we're just like I can't explain this to you without you having seen it, but like the amount of just like sitting around we're doing and
Hmm.
talking about the inevitability of this war is staggering
Uh-huh.
to me.
Yeah, just treading water sounds like.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, so my understanding of this, which again I haven't watched it, but like I kind of actually know the plot, and the reason is um I didn't actually listen to the dragon book,
Fire and Blood, I think it's
Fire
called.
and Blood, but I did listen to like a podcast that went over it episode by episode, because I guess I'm just like one of our listeners who lis- listens to us talk about things but doesn't actually read the source material, which is, now I understand. Now I understand. Um, and like it sounds very, I don't want to say dry because that makes it sound like there's no drama, but like the way it's told is sort of like this long history of like, and then this happened, and then this
Yeah,
person was betrayed, and this person killed this person, and then this person rebelled, and then and it's like, okay, so for the show they clearly had to find like the dramatic through lines of these stories,
yeah.
and it sounds like it's just they they're just having a really hard time like knowing how to navigate that in a way that feels satisfying to the viewers, because
Yeah.
it's taken forever.
Yeah, and the most frustrating part to me is I think this is an extraordinarily well-made television show. Like I think the acting is really good, the direction, like it looks good. It's very clear that they've spent an absolute shit ton of money on this. When you do get to see the dragons, and when the dragons do very briefly fight, like it's like, wow, hey, that looks good. That looks
Hmm.
like dragons fighting. That's pretty cool. But it's just so far few and far between. It is incredibly frustrating. There is like okay, I'm gonna spoil a brief thing about the end of the first season, right? And
Okay.
you know the plot line already, so I'm not really telling this for you. I'm telling this for the listeners. At the end of the first season, Rhaenyra, who is like I guess the protagonist, she's the one who has the strongest claim on the throne. Her father specifically declared that she would be the queen after his death. This was before he had a son with his new wife that happens to be her best friend. um
Hmm.
anyway, her son is killed by one of Alicent's sons on a dragon because
Hmm.
there was some old animosity between the families. Like their son's riding around on a dragon, he swoops up with this bigger, better dragon and just like chomps the little dragon and the kid on top of it. And like the implication at the end of that episode and the end of that season is like, all right, we spent a season setting this whole thing up, but now her kid's dead. And now suddenly it's on. Like
Hmm.
it's wartime. Like this is it. And then the whole season is like, but what should we do? Is there any way to avoid this war? I'm like, wait, no, we did
Yeah.
that already. That was what
Right.
that whole thing was about. What are we doing here?
Uh-huh.
And like, I think it is the frustrating part about this to me, and I think this is a perfect kind of way to jump off of our conversation about Beneath the Planet of the Apes, is all of this stuff already happened. And not only did it already happen, but it's referenced as happening in Game of Thrones, right?
Hmm.
Like they don't we don't know the full story of this, but they talk about the war all the time. And we know who has to win because we know who eventually ends up with the throne and everything that leads up to the events of a Game of Thrones. So there's never any moment for any kind of like creativity outside the borders of what has to happen.
Hmm.
Like we have to try to like look at two characters and we have this thing that happens between them we know about, and we have to try to like implant drama and interesting moments in the space of that thing, but it makes the whole thing feel very restricted. It's like we have to hit the beats, we have to hit all these things, and we have to find the drama in between those beats. And it just never feels like it's allowed to like expand and explore. And like a lot of these characters are very, very interesting. They are very, very interesting, but ultimately they have to do XYZ. And this is yes, what happens when you make a prequel, but also what happens when you're living in this world of ongoing multiverses where everything has to eventually get to a certain point, no matter what.
Hmm.
And I just feel I feel caged in when I watch shows like this.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's one thing that comes to mind is just George R. R. Martin's style of storytelling is very brilliant in his books, where he's the master of setting up an expectation and then kind of setting you up to think you know how he's going to subvert the expectation. And then he does a third thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's neither of those first two things, neither the obvious expectation nor the obvious uh, 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 second thing. He, instead of zigging or zagging, he zogs, and it results in very like human, sort of real feeling stories where it's like, yeah, wow, like that does make sense as a thing that character would do, and not just like a thing that's convenient for the plot. And the problem with this story is it's like, no, this is literally just like an outline of a war that happens over a long period of time. So a lot of it just is kind of paint by numbers. Then they got mad because their son was killed, like you were just saying. It's like, okay, there's not a lot of room for like some twisty turny plotty thing to happen, or even really some like interesting authentic character moment that is
Yeah.
not obvious, not just the obvious one, right? um
Yeah.
I don't know. There's also one thing I remember from listening to the podcast is like he likes to kind of play with your trope awareness from the other books. So it'll be like, oh, this is a Baratheon, and then it's like, oh, they're kind of doing things that Robert might have done,
Yeah.
but then maybe they do this other thing over here that's very different from what Robert would have done, and it's kind of playing
Yeah.
with your expectations like that.
Yeah, I mean, in this season, like one of the princes goes and talks with the Starks, and there's like a whole scene on the wall as he's chatting with the current Stark Lord, and it's like that we're also like continually doing this thing where this can't just be a show about the Targaryens and their reign of power. It has to tie into not only a Game of Thrones, but the Song of Ice and Fire and the Prince Who Is Promised. It like has to tie into all that shit.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, why? Why does it have to do that? It doesn't have to do that. Actually,
Hmm.
this can just be a story about these people and their fighting and their dragons and their dragon as nuclear weapon metaphor. Like that's all it has to be. But no, we can't just make it that. We have to do this larger thing. I'm so tired of talking about the Song of Ice and Fire. Actually, I'm so tired of it.
I'd be less tired of it if there was, a new book, but oh
Yeah,
well.
well, it's never happening. So we're gonna make these great TV shows.
Yeah. I mean,
So yeah,
I don't
the
know.
show's ending in 4 seasons, so maybe next season we'll get the war. I think another problem is I have also read the story of this war. I know how many battles are in the war, and there's not that many of them. And so if you do one of the battles in season 2, you got 2 seasons left of TV you got to make. How
Uh-huh.
are you going to do that? And that's like, it just, yeah, it sucks. I wish shows were as long as they should be and not as long as that the studio required them to be. Like, this is the same. The Bear is a show that I absolutely love, a show about a restaurant in Chicago. They were originally supposed to be 3 seasons. They were begged to expand to 4 seasons, and so they did. And the 3rd season was the weakest of the 3 because it felt like a season that knew it had to stretch its character and plot beats out for a whole nother season after this. And this is a recurring thing that's happening, Matt, in television.
Yeah.
When we have these contained stories, like, I feel like shows in the old way can easily expand out to more seasons because they're shows that operate on an episode by episode format. But shows that are a contained story, that kind of know what their contained story is, know what their character arcs are ultimately going to be from the beginning, and then suddenly they have to make 20 more episodes. You have to find a way to fit all this stuff in, or stretch this stuff out rather, and it ultimately is weaker storytelling for me.
Yeah, right. I mean, this continues to be why Breaking Bad is the best TV show ever, because
True.
they ended it when they needed to.
Yeah, and I honestly don't think that was a series that, beyond like the larger arc of where Walter White was going to go, I don't think if you asked Vince Gilligan, he would tell you exactly what the plot of that show was going to be from the beginning. I think
agree.
They were writing it as they were going.
They're writing as they were doing, and they knew when it needed to be done because they were done with what the characters were going through, right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree. Cool. So in conclusion, you don't need to watch that show, Matt. I was wondering if after the 2nd season, because I believe I told you after season 1 you don't need to watch this show, and I was wondering after season 2 if I would get to tell you something different, but the answer is no.
All right, thanks. Saved me a lot of time.
You're welcome. 18 hours I've spent on this thing, and you know what? Am I going to watch the next 2 seasons? Sure am.
Maybe it'll turn around in season 3, and then you'll be like, okay, Matt, bad news.
But maybe. But ultimately, how could one expect a person to watch 20 hours of entertainment before it gets good? That's an absurd thing. It's an absurd thing to expect a person to do.
I suppose so.
All right, folks, that's all we had for you this week. If you have any opinions on Beneath the Planet of the Apes, on I Am Cat. Wait, that's the name of it, right? I Am Cat.
I Am Cat.
You are Cat.
I Am Cat.
Or House of the Dragon and the Problem with Modern TV Storytelling, you can let us know. Reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com or over on our Twitter account at doofmedia. You can also head to the subreddit r/doofmedia and leave your comment there.
That's right. If you're not already subscribed to the Doofcast, please do so, and you'll never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, YouTube, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found.
And if you like what we do here and want to support us, please consider becoming a patron of Doof Media. You can head over to patreon.com/doofmedia and pledge at any of the available levels. You'll get access to a bunch of cool bonus content. You'll get to vote in our monthly book club polls and our Doof Canon polls and all that good stuff. So please join us there and help support us make this show.
Yeah. Also, please consider sending us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Each review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to the content that we make here.
All right, folks, next week, more apes. This time, we don't want to be on their planet anymore. We want to get away from it. So we're going to escape from the planet of the apes. We'll see you next week.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.